He saved 2 Apache women from the ice. 3 days later, 30 surrounded his cabin. Choose, one or both. The wind was biting, and every step he took left a deep mark in the fresh snow. He was used to this life of solitude. Living alone in the wilderness had taught him to rely on his instincts and his courage. The mountains were beautiful but cruel, and anyone who underestimated them would pay the price. John knew that better than anyone. On this particular morning, he had woken before sunrise, as he always did, to check his traps for rabbits and to gather firewood. The cold air burned his lungs with every breath, but he welcomed it. It was a clear, crisp day, the sky pale blue, and the sunlight reflecting off the ice and snow created a sparkling world. But beneath the beauty, the mountains could be merciless. Hidden beneath the snow were frozen rivers, cliffs, and dangerous drops that could trap or kill anyone unaware of the terrain. As John trudged along a narrow path that skirted a frozen river, something caught his eye. At first he thought it was a fallen branch sparkling in the sun, but then he noticed movement. 2 figures were struggling on the ice in the middle of the river, unable to stand, slipping and falling repeatedly. They were women, and their movements were weak, slow, and desperate. Ice had formed over the river in patches, making it look solid, but it was treacherous. Every second they stayed there, the ice threatened to give way. John's heart raced. He didn't stop to think. Without hesitation, he grabbed a long branch from the snow and ran toward the riverbank. The ice cracked loudly beneath him, but he kept his weight low and moved carefully. The women were shaking, not just from the cold, but from fear. Their clothes were thin, soaked from the icy water, and their teeth chattered uncontrollably. One of them, younger, looked frightened and weak, while the older one struggled to help her friend, trying to keep her afloat. John knew he had to act quickly. He dropped to his stomach, crawling slowly onto the ice, using the branch to reach them. "Hold on," he shouted. "I'm coming." The younger woman cried out, her voice trembling. He extended the branch to the older woman first. She grabbed it with frozen fingers, trying to pull herself out. John used all his strength, slowly dragging her closer to the bank. The ice cracked under his weight several times, and snow fell into the river around them, but he didn't panic. He kept his focus on getting them to safety. Once the older woman was safely on the shore, he turned to the younger one. She was exhausted, barely able to hold onto the ice. John slid closer and held his arms out to her. "Take my hand," he yelled. With a desperate effort, she reached for him. The ice under her legs broke slightly, and she fell into the freezing water. Without hesitation, John grabbed her and pulled with every ounce of his strength. The cold water seeped into his boots and through his coat, numbing his body, but he didn't let go. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he managed to drag her onto solid ground. Both women were shaking violently, their lips blue, their bodies trembling uncontrollably. John could see the frostbite beginning to take hold of their fingers and toes. He knew he had to act quickly to prevent permanent injury. He helped them to his cabin, which was not far from the river, though the journey through the snow was slow and exhausting. He wrapped them in thick blankets and made a fire, carefully warming their bodies while checking for injuries. They could not speak much at first. The cold had taken their voices as well as their strength. John offered them water and some dried meat he had stored. He spoke gently to them, trying to calm them and reassure them that they were safe now. "You're safe," he said. "Just rest. The fire will warm you and you'll be okay." Slowly, the older woman nodded, and the younger one managed a weak smile. They had trusted him enough to allow him to help, and he could see the relief in their eyes. As the day went on, John worked carefully, helping them remove wet clothes, rubbing their hands and feet to restore circulation, and keeping the fire going. He realized that he had been lucky to find them in time. Just a few minutes later, and the ice could have given way completely, sweeping them into the freezing river. He felt a deep sense of responsibility for their lives now. They were strangers from a different world than his own, but their safety depended entirely on him. By the evening, the women had regained some strength, though their teeth still chattered and their bodies trembled from the cold. They looked at John with gratitude, and he felt a quiet warmth in his chest. In that moment, all the hardships of his own life in the wilderness felt worth it. Saving someone's life, especially against the merciless force of nature, was a feeling that could not be described. He prepared a small meal for them, careful to keep it simple but nourishing. They ate quietly, still too weak to speak much. He could tell they had been traveling, that something had driven them to risk crossing the frozen river. He wanted to ask questions, but he knew that rushing them would only frighten them. Patience was necessary. Trust could not be forced. As the night fell, the cabin grew warm from the fire and the women huddled under blankets, finally beginning to relax. John sat nearby, keeping watch, his mind alert to any sound outside. The wind howled through the trees and snow continued to fall, but inside, for a brief time, there was safety, warmth, and a fragile sense of peace. He thought about the river, about the danger they had faced, and about the courage it must have taken for them to survive that long on the ice. He knew their journey was far from over, but he had given them a chance. And sometimes in the harsh wilderness, that chance was all that mattered. By the end of the night, John had learned their names, Ahioka and Naeli. Slowly, they began to share small stories about their lives, their tribe, and the journey that had led them to the frozen river. Though the language was different, they communicated with gestures, smiles, and eyes that spoke volumes. John realized that even in moments of fear and desperation, humans could connect, could trust, and could help one another survive. As he lay down that night, John knew that the coming days would be challenging. The mountains were not forgiving, and the presence of strangers could bring danger. But he also knew that he had done the right thing. He had saved 2 lives against the odds, and that act would stay with him forever. And as he drifted into sleep by the firelight, he resolved to protect these women at all costs, not just because it was the right thing, but because life in the wilderness had taught him that courage and compassion were often the same thing. The next morning, the cabin was quiet, except for the crackle of the fire. The sun had just risen over the snow-covered mountains, casting long shadows across the frozen landscape. John woke early, as he always did, but this time his mind was not only on survival and daily chores. He was thinking about the 2 women, Ahioka and Naeli, who had survived a frozen river because of his intervention. They were still weak, their bodies recovering slowly from the cold, but their spirits were resilient. He could see the gratitude in their eyes, and it touched him in a way he had never expected. He prepared a simple breakfast, heating some water for tea and cooking dried meat over the fire. The smell filled the cabin and the women stirred from their blankets, the warmth drawing them from sleep. They were still quiet, observing everything carefully, but John noticed a small change from the night before. They seemed less afraid. The youngest, Naeli, gave him a small smile when he handed her a cup of warm tea. It was a tiny gesture, but to John, it meant a great deal. It meant they were beginning to trust him. After breakfast, he helped them dress in dry clothes he had laid out for them. His cabin was small, but he had enough blankets, coats, and boots to share. Ahioka's fingers were still stiff from frostbite, and John carefully warmed them by the fire, massaging them gently. He spoke softly, explaining what he was doing, and she watched him with eyes full of curiosity and caution. Naeli, on the other hand, stayed close to her sister, occasionally glancing at John, as if measuring whether he could be trusted. Once they were dressed and somewhat recovered, John suggested they step outside for fresh air. The snow reflected the sunlight so brightly that he shaded his eyes, and the women followed him, careful on the icy ground. They walked slowly, leaning on his arms when necessary. The mountains looked peaceful in the morning light, but John knew better. Nature here was unpredictable, and one wrong step could be dangerous. Still, for a moment, He let them enjoy the beauty of their surroundings. The tall pine trees covered in snow, the distant frozen rivers, and the silence that stretched across the mountains. As they walked, John tried to learn more about them, asking simple questions about where they came from and why they were so far from their village. His own words were limited, as he had only a few words in the Apache language, but gestures and patience bridged the gap. Ahioka and Nayeli spoke slowly, pointing to the mountains and their clothing to explain their journey. John realized that they had been traveling for days, possibly weeks, and that the frozen river incident had been a dangerous turning point in their journey. They had risked everything, and yet fate had led them to his cabin. Back inside the cabin, John prepared some food while the women rested. He chopped vegetables, boiled water, and made a stew that smelled comforting and warm. They had not eaten much in the past few days, and he knew nourishment was crucial. As they ate together, he noticed small gestures of connection, the women helping each other, sharing food, and occasionally looking at him with cautious trust. It was a slow process, but every small act mattered. Over the next few hours, John showed them how to keep warm in the cabin, how to sit close to the fire, and how to rest without letting their bodies get chilled. He also taught them to recognize the sounds of the wilderness, the crack of a branch, the howl of the wind, and the distant call of an animal. Survival here was about more than just strength. It was about knowledge, awareness, and respect for the mountains. The women listened carefully, absorbing every detail. John admired their determination. Even in the face of exhaustion and fear, they wanted to learn to survive and to trust him. As the day passed, the women slowly began to speak more. Ahioka shared stories about her village, her family, and the people she had left behind. Her voice was soft but steady, and John listened closely, fascinated by her words and the history she carried. Nayeli added her own stories, describing the journey they had undertaken and the dangers they had faced. John could see the courage in their eyes, the same courage that had kept them alive on the ice. By afternoon, John decided it was time to prepare the cabin for the coming night. The wind would grow stronger, and the temperature would drop even further. He chopped more firewood, reinforced the small windows against drafts, and double-checked the roof for snow accumulation. The women watched and helped where they could, learning by observation and small gestures. John realized that this experience was more than just survival. It was about building trust, understanding, and mutual respect. While they worked, John could not help but notice the bond forming between Ahioka and Nayeli and himself. There was a quiet understanding developing, a recognition that in this harsh wilderness, cooperation and trust were essential. He felt a sense of responsibility heavier than he had ever known. These women's lives were in his hands now, and he could not afford to fail. Every decision mattered, every movement could mean safety or danger. As evening approached, John prepared another simple meal and encouraged the women to eat. Their strength was returning, though slowly. He noticed that Nayeli was beginning to ask questions, pointing to the tools in the cabin, the fire, and the outside world. Ahioka seemed more reserved but equally curious. John realized that their fear was gradually giving way to cautious interest. The cabin, which had seemed like a temporary refuge, was now becoming a place of learning, safety, and connection. After dinner, they all sat by the fire. John told stories of the mountains, of the animals he had encountered, and of the lessons he had learned living alone. The women listened intently, occasionally smiling or nodding. They shared their own experiences, teaching John words in their language, describing the customs of their people, and showing him small gestures of their culture. It was a slow, careful exchange, but it created a bridge between their worlds, a bridge built on trust, respect, and shared survival. That night, as the wind howled outside and the snow drifted against the cabin walls, John watched the two women sleep. They looked peaceful for the first time since the river incident. He felt a deep sense of fulfillment, but also a sense of vigilance. He knew that the mountains could be dangerous, and that human threats might be waiting beyond the snow-covered trees. Yet in that moment he allowed himself a rare feeling of hope. Hope that they could survive, that trust could endure, and that life, even in the harshest conditions, could be full of small, meaningful victories. Over the next day, John continued teaching and caring for Ahioka and Naeli. He showed them how to gather wood safely, how to melt snow for drinking water, and how to recognize signs of approaching storms. They learned quickly, driven by necessity and a desire to regain control over their lives. John noticed their resilience and intelligence. They were not helpless victims, they were survivors, and he felt proud to help them recover their strength. As they worked together, small moments of laughter and camaraderie emerged. Naeli made a mistake while chopping firewood, and John laughed gently, showing her how to correct it. Ahioka tripped over a log and they both laughed, the sound warm and bright in the cold cabin. For the first time since their journey began, they were beginning to feel human again, safe, nourished, and able to hope. By the end of the second day, the women were stronger, their frostbite healing, their spirits renewed. John felt a sense of accomplishment, but he also knew that the wilderness held many dangers, and that they could not let their guard down. He was determined to protect them, to teach them, and to ensure that they could survive whatever lay ahead. And as the sun set over the mountains, casting golden light across the snow, he felt a quiet sense of peace. They were together, safe for now, and that was all that mattered. Evening came and the fire crackled warmly in the cabin. Ahioka and Naeli shared stories of their village, their voices growing more confident with each word. John listened, fascinated by their culture, their family stories, and their dreams. For the first time, he felt that they were not just survivors, they were people with lives, hopes, and strength. And he realized that his role in their story was more than that of a rescuer. He was a protector, a teacher, and in some way a friend. As night fell, the mountains outside grew dark and silent. The wind howled through the trees, but inside the cabin there was warmth, laughter, and connection. John watched the women sleep, feeling a sense of pride and responsibility. He knew the days ahead would be challenging, but he also knew that together, they could face whatever the mountains threw at them. In the harsh wilderness, survival was not just about strength. It was about trust, courage, and the bonds formed between people willing to help each other. The following morning, the cabin was quieter than usual. John had grown accustomed to the wind whistling through the mountains, the snow crunching under his boots, and the occasional call of a distant animal. But today, there was a different kind of silence, a tense stillness that seemed to hang over the snow-covered trees. He noticed it first as he stepped outside to check the firewood. The mountains were beautiful, blanketed in snow and sunlight, yet something felt off. As he walked along the path that led from his cabin, he caught sight of footprints in the fresh snow. They were not ordinary animal tracks. These were larger, heavier, and moved in a deliberate pattern. He crouched and examined them carefully. There were at least 30 sets, all coming from the same direction, and they led straight toward his cabin. His heart began to beat faster. He had encountered other humans in the mountains before, but this many, moving together and unannounced, could only mean trouble. John returned to the cabin, trying not to alarm Ahioka and Naeli. He told them to stay inside and not to make any sudden movements. The women, sensing the seriousness of his tone, nodded silently. Their trust in him had grown over the past few days, and they could feel that something important was happening. John moved quietly to the window, peering through the frost and snow. In the distance, he could see the figures moving steadily toward the cabin, their shapes forming a line against the white landscape. The visitors were Apache warriors, 30 strong, their faces serious and their movements disciplined. John had rescued 2 Apache women just days before, but he knew that his actions might have unintended consequences. In their culture, Honor and responsibility were deeply important, and a stranger helping their people without permission could be seen as interference. He realized that the women he had saved were now the reason these warriors were approaching. John's mind raced. He had to think quickly. He had spent the past 3 days healing and teaching the women, and he could not let their safety be jeopardized. He glanced at Ahioka and Naeli, who were watching him with wide, anxious eyes. "Stay calm," he whispered. "Everything will be fine. Just stay here." He hoped his words were more reassuring than they sounded. As the warriors drew closer, John noticed their leader step forward. He was taller than the others, his face painted with red and black marks that signified authority and experience. His eyes were sharp, focused, and filled with intensity. John could feel the weight of his gaze even from the window. The leader raised his hand, signaling the group to stop. The warriors spread out, forming a circle around the cabin. Their presence was powerful, and the mountains seemed to grow silent around them, as if holding their breath. John stepped outside slowly, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. The leader approached, keeping his distance but speaking clearly. "You have 2 of our women," he said. His voice was calm, yet there was an unmistakable edge of authority. "You saved them from the ice, but now we must decide their fate. Choose, one or both." The words hit John like a cold wind. He understood the gravity of the situation. This was not a threat made lightly. The women's lives were in his hands, and the warriors expected him to respond. He thought quickly. Refusal or hesitation could be interpreted as disrespect or weakness, but he could not choose between them. Both women had trusted him, and he had vowed to protect them. He looked at the leader's eyes, trying to gauge his intentions. The man's face was unreadable, his posture firm but not aggressive. There was a sense of honor in the way he stood, an expectation that John would act according to his own principles. John took a deep breath. "I cannot choose," he said, his voice steady despite the fear gripping him. "Both women are safe with me. I will not harm either of them." His words hung in the air, and for a moment the wind seemed to stop. The warriors exchanged glances, their expressions serious and thoughtful. John realized that he had taken a risk. He had not threatened them, but he had also refused their ultimatum. The leader stepped closer, his eyes never leaving John's. "You saved their lives," he said. "That is true, but the tribe must decide what is just. You are not our enemy, yet your choice affects us all." "We do not act without reason." John nodded, understanding that negotiation was possible, but he had to remain careful. Every word, every gesture mattered. One wrong move could turn this situation deadly. Inside the cabin, Ahioka and Naeli were tense but silent. They trusted John, and he could feel their fear mingling with their hope. He gestured for them to stay calm and out of sight. The snow outside continued to fall lightly, covering footprints and softening the edges of the world, as if giving them a momentary pause from the tension. John knew that this pause could not last forever. The leader continued to speak, explaining the traditions of their people. They honored bravery, respect, and the lives of those they protected. By saving the women, John had shown courage and compassion, qualities they respected. Yet the women were still under their care in a cultural sense. Their decision would balance justice, honor, and the lives at stake. John listened carefully, nodding, acknowledging their perspective. He realized that this conversation, held in the quiet of the mountains, was delicate and important. For the next few hours, John engaged in careful discussion with the leader. He explained his reasons for saving the women, his concern for their well-being, and his willingness to follow their guidance. He spoke honestly, with respect and humility. The warriors listened, their expressions thoughtful, occasionally glancing at the women in the cabin. The tension in the air was palpable, but it was a controlled tension, a test of character, patience, and understanding. As the afternoon passed, the leader finally spoke again. "Your actions show honor," he said. "You risked your life for hours, and that must be recognized. but the tribe must also consider the consequences. You will not be judged lightly, nor will the women. You must demonstrate that your intentions are true, that your courage and compassion are real." John nodded, understanding that this was both a warning and an acknowledgement of his bravery. He proposed a solution, one that balanced respect for the tribe's customs with his promise to protect the women. "Allow me to care for them until they are strong enough to return safely," he said. "I will not hide them or refuse the tribe. When the time comes, I will bring them to you unharmed. This way, no harm will come to anyone and the women will remain safe." The leader considered this, pacing slowly in the snow, his eyes fixed on John. The other warriors watched silently, waiting for his decision. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the leader nodded. "We will give you this chance," he said. "But know this, the tribe will be watching. Any deception, any harm, and the consequences will be yours. Honor your word and the women will remain safe." John bowed slightly, acknowledging the weight of his promise. "I will honor it," he replied. The tension that had gripped him eased slightly, replaced by cautious relief. The warriors began to retreat slowly, maintaining a watchful distance. The snow under their boots crunched softly, and the mountains seemed to exhale after holding their breath. John watched them go, making sure they left peacefully before turning back to the cabin. Ahioka and Naeli were relieved but still wary. They had witnessed the seriousness of the situation and understood the danger, yet they trusted John completely. That evening, John and the women sat by the fire, speaking softly about the events of the day. He reassured them that they were safe, that the warriors had left for now, and that he would continue to protect them. They listened, their trust growing stronger, and for the first time there was a sense of hope mixed with relief. The mountains outside remained quiet, the snow continuing to fall gently, as if blessing the fragile peace that had been achieved. As night fell, John reflected on the events of the day. He realized that courage was not just about facing the cold or the dangers of the mountains. It was also about facing moral challenges, making difficult decisions, and standing firm in one's convictions. He had acted with compassion, respected the customs of the tribe, and found a way to protect the women without causing harm. And in that moment, he understood that true courage was measured not by strength alone, but by integrity, respect, and the willingness to do what was right, even when the choice was difficult. The fire crackled warmly in the cabin, casting flickering shadows on the walls. Ahioka and Naeli were resting, their trust in John evident in their quiet breathing and relaxed posture. Outside, the mountains loomed silently, a constant reminder of the harsh world beyond the cabin walls. But inside there was warmth, connection, and the fragile promise of safety. John knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges, but he also knew that together they could face whatever came next. And as he lay down that night, listening to the wind howl outside and the snow drift softly against the cabin, John felt a sense of determination stronger than ever. The mountains were still dangerous, the world beyond his cabin uncertain, and the future unpredictable. Yet he had learned that trust, courage, and compassion could overcome even the most difficult challenges, and that sometimes the hardest choices were also the most rewarding. The night had passed quietly, but John did not sleep well. His mind was busy replaying the events of the previous day. The arrival of the 30 Apache warriors, the tension, the ultimatum, and the decision he had made to protect both women. Even though the immediate danger had passed, he could feel the weight of responsibility pressing heavily on him. Ahioka and Naeli were recovering, but their lives were still tied to his choices. The mountains were silent around the cabin, but in his mind, a storm raged. Morning came slowly. The sun's pale light reflected off the snow, making everything look calm and peaceful. But John knew better. Danger could appear when least expected, and trust could be tested at any moment. He carefully roused the women, checking to see if they had slept peacefully. Their eyes were bright but cautious, still aware of the potential dangers outside. They had started to trust him, but John knew that trust could not be taken for granted. It had to be earned every day. He prepared a simple breakfast of dried meat, warm tea, and boiled roots he had gathered earlier. The women ate quietly, their movements careful and deliberate. John noticed the tension in their eyes. They were aware that something could happen again at any moment, and he wanted to reassure them without giving them false hope. "Today," he said softly, "we will prepare for anything. We need to be ready, but we are safe here for now." His words seemed to calm them slightly, though the unease lingered. After breakfast, John decided it was time to teach them more about survival in the mountains. He showed them how to gather firewood safely, how to recognize animal tracks, and how to move quietly through the snow. The women listened intently, eager to learn, their focus sharp despite the fear that lingered in the back of their minds. John could see that they were growing stronger, not just physically, but mentally. Their resilience was impressive, and he admired their determination. As they worked together, John could feel a tension building outside the cabin. The mountains, usually silent, seemed to hold their breath. He glanced at the trees, scanning the horizon for any movement. And then he saw them, figures moving slowly but deliberately through the snow. His heart sank. It was the same group of warriors returning to the cabin. He could not tell if they were angry, testing him, or coming with another plan. All he knew was that the situation was about to become more complicated. The warriors approached quietly, forming a circle around the cabin once more. John stepped outside, hands raised, showing that he meant no harm. The leader of the group, the same man who had spoken the day before, stepped forward. His expression was serious, his eyes fixed on John. "You have kept your word," he said. "You have not harmed the women. But now you face a choice. We honor courage, but we must also honor our traditions. You must choose one or both." The words hung in the air, heavier than the snow around them. John felt a cold wave of fear wash over him, but he did not show it. He knew that hesitation or indecision could be dangerous. He looked at Ahioka and Naeli, who were standing behind him, their eyes wide and filled with trust. How could he possibly choose between them? They had both depended on him, and he had promised to protect them. He could not betray that promise. He took a deep breath, steadying himself. "I cannot choose," he said firmly. "Both women are safe with me. I will not harm either of them." The leader's eyes narrowed slightly, studying John carefully. The other warriors remained silent, their expressions unreadable. John realized that this moment was a test, not just of his courage, but of his integrity. The women's lives were in his hands, and the warriors were watching to see if he would act with honor or fear. He knew that he had to remain calm, steady, and honest. Any sign of weakness could put everyone in danger. Inside the cabin, Ahioka and Naeli were tense but quiet. They trusted John, and their eyes reflected hope as well as fear. John gestured for them to stay calm and hidden, keeping them out of sight while he negotiated with the warriors. The snow outside continued to fall, softening the edges of the world, as if giving them a momentary pause from the tension. But John knew that this pause was fragile. Every word, every gesture, every breath mattered. The leader spoke again, explaining the importance of tradition and honor in their culture. They respected bravery, compassion, and the protection of their people. By saving the women, John had shown courage, but the tribe still needed to ensure that justice was served. He listened carefully, nodding, understanding that this was both a warning and an acknowledgement of his actions. The warriors were not unreasonable. They were guided by their values, and John had to respect that while keeping the women safe. John proposed a solution, speaking with calm authority. "Allow me to care for them until they are strong enough to return safely," he said. "I will not hide them or refuse the tribe. When the time comes, I will bring them to you unharmed. This way, no harm will come to anyone and the women will remain safe." The leader paused, pacing slowly in the snow, his eyes never leaving John. The other warriors watched silently, waiting for his decision. Finally, after what felt like hours, the leader nodded. "We will give you this chance," he said. "But know this, the tribe will be watching. Any deception, any harm, and the consequences will be yours. Honor your word and the women will remain safe." John bowed slightly, acknowledging the weight of his promise. "I will honor it," he replied, feeling the tension in his chest ease slightly. The warriors began to retreat, their footsteps soft in the snow. The mountains seemed to exhale after holding their breath for so long. John watched them leave, making sure they were gone before turning back to the cabin. Ahioka and Naeli were relieved but still wary. They understood the seriousness of the situation and the danger they had faced. Yet they trusted John completely, their eyes reflecting hope and gratitude. As the day continued, John focused on preparing the cabin for any future challenges. He reinforced the walls, gathered extra firewood, and stocked supplies. He taught the women how to move quickly and quietly in case of emergencies. Every task, every lesson, was a preparation for survival. The mountains were beautiful, but they were also unforgiving, and John knew that being ready was essential. By evening, the women were stronger, their bodies recovering, their spirits renewed. John felt a sense of accomplishment, but also a deep awareness of the challenges that lay ahead. He had protected them so far, but the world outside the cabin was unpredictable. Every decision could have consequences, and he had to remain vigilant. That night they sat by the fire, speaking softly about the events of the day. John reassured them that they were safe and that he would continue to protect them. They listened, their trust in him growing stronger. For the first time since their journey began, there was a sense of hope mixed with caution. The mountains outside were silent, the snow falling gently, as if blessing the fragile peace that had been achieved. John reflected on the events and realized that courage was not just about facing physical danger. It was also about facing moral challenges, making difficult decisions, and standing firm in one's convictions. He had acted with compassion, respected the tribe's customs, and found a way to protect the women without causing harm. True courage, he understood, was measured not by strength alone, but by integrity, respect, and the willingness to do what was right, even when the choice was impossible. The fire crackled warmly, casting shadows on the walls. Ahioka and Naeli were resting, their trust in John evident in their quiet breathing. The mountains loomed silently outside, a constant reminder of the harsh world beyond the cabin walls. But inside, there was warmth, connection, and the fragile promise of safety. John knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges, but he also knew that together, they could face whatever came next. As he lay down that night, listening to the wind howl outside and the snow drift softly against the cabin, John felt a determination stronger than ever. The mountains were still dangerous, the world beyond his cabin uncertain, and the future unpredictable. Yet he had learned that trust, courage, and compassion could overcome even the most difficult challenges, and that sometimes the hardest choices were also the most rewarding. Morning came slowly over the snow-covered mountains, casting a soft golden light across the frozen landscape. John awoke before sunrise, as he always did, but today his mind was filled with anticipation and concern. The events of the past days weighed heavily on him: the rescue of Ahioka and Naeli, the arrival of the 30 Apache warriors, and the impossible choices he had faced. But he knew that today would be different. Today, he would find a way to ensure the women's safety and bring this chapter to a hopeful conclusion. He quietly checked the fire and prepared a simple breakfast for the women. Ahioka and Naeli were already awake, sitting by the fire, their eyes cautious but curious. They had grown stronger over the past few days, their bodies recovering from the cold and their spirits beginning to return. Yet the fear of what might come still lingered in their expressions. John could see it clearly, and he knew that reassurance and careful planning were needed now more than ever. As they ate, John spoke softly, explaining that he would go out to meet the warriors and negotiate a resolution. "I promise," he said, "no harm will come to you. I will speak with them and find a way for us all to be safe. But you must stay here and be ready to follow my instructions." The women nodded, trusting him completely. Their trust had become his guiding principle, a responsibility heavier than any task he had faced in the wilderness. He dressed carefully, layering his clothes to withstand the cold, and took the path toward the clearing where the warriors had gathered before. The snow crunched under his boots and the cold air burned his lungs, but he moved steadily, keeping his mind focused. As he approached, he saw the 30 warriors waiting silently, their faces serious, their eyes alert. At the center stood their leader, his gaze sharp and commanding. John took a deep breath and stepped forward, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. The leader spoke first, his voice calm but firm. "You have kept your word. You have not harmed the women and you have cared for them, yet the tribe must ensure that honor is maintained. You must explain why they are still with you and how you will return them safely." John nodded, understanding that his actions would now be judged not only for their courage but also for their honesty and respect. "I have cared for them because they were in danger," John began. "They were trapped on the frozen river, and if I had not acted they could have died. I have not hidden them and I will not harm them. When they are strong enough, I will bring them to you safely. But while they are recovering, I ask for your understanding and patience. Their lives are fragile and they need time." The warriors exchanged glances, their expressions thoughtful. John noticed a subtle change in their posture, a recognition that he spoke with truth and respect. The leader stepped closer, studying John carefully. "You speak honestly," he said. "Your actions show courage and respect. The tribe values both. But you must demonstrate your intentions through deeds, not words alone. If you betray trust, the consequences will be severe." John nodded solemnly. "I understand. I will prove my intentions through my actions, not words. The women will remain safe, and when the time is right, I will return them unharmed." The leader studied him for a long moment, then finally gave a slow nod. "Very well. We will watch and we will judge by your deeds. For now, the women may remain with you, but know this, the tribe's eyes are upon you and your honor is now bound to theirs." Relief washed over John, but he did not show it. The moment required vigilance, not celebration. He carefully guided the women to a safer spot near the edge of the clearing, keeping them out of the warriors' immediate view while ensuring they were within his protection. Ahioka and Naeli's faces reflected cautious hope, their trust in John stronger than ever. They understood the seriousness of the situation, yet they could feel that a resolution was possible. Over the next few hours, John worked to prepare the cabin and its surroundings. He reinforced the windows, gathered extra firewood, and set simple defensive measures in case the warriors returned unexpectedly. He also took the time to teach the women small techniques to stay safe and alert, emphasizing calmness, observation, and quick thinking. They listened carefully, absorbing every detail, their trust and admiration for John growing with each lesson. As the sun began to lower in the sky, John decided it was time to invite the leader and a few of the warriors closer for a direct discussion. He wanted to show that he had nothing to hide and that his intentions were honorable. The leader approached cautiously, followed by a handful of his strongest and most trusted warriors. John greeted them respectfully, bowing slightly and keeping his hands visible. The women watched from a safe distance, their eyes wide with anticipation and hope. John spoke clearly and respectfully. "I have kept my promise. I have cared for the women, ensured their safety, and prepared them to return to your tribe. They are strong enough now to travel, and I will guide them personally. No harm will come to them, and I ask only that you trust my actions as I have honored your customs." The leader studied him, his expression unreadable, but there was a quiet respect in his eyes. After a long moment, the leader finally nodded. "Your actions speak louder than words," he said. "You have shown courage, respect, and honor. The tribe will accept your judgment. Bring the women to us unharmed, and our honor will be maintained. You have proven yourself worthy of trust." John felt a wave of relief and gratitude, but he remained careful, understanding that the situation still required vigilance. He guided Ahioka and Naeli toward the clearing, speaking softly to reassure them. Their hands were in his, their trust complete. As they approached the warriors, John could see the tension in the air begin to dissolve. The leader stepped forward, raising a hand in acknowledgement of John's honesty and courage. The women looked at him with gratitude, their expressions reflecting relief and admiration. John realized that this moment was the culmination of everything they had endured together, the danger, the trust, and the shared courage that had brought them here safely. The warriors welcomed the women back with quiet respect. They did not speak harshly, nor did they show anger. Instead, there was a sense of honor and acknowledgement, a recognition of the risks John had taken and the courage he had shown. Ahioka and Naeli were safe, and the mountains seemed to echo with a sense of peace, the wind softening as if in approval. John stood back, watching the reunion with quiet satisfaction. The women were speaking with their people, sharing stories of their journey and the dangers they had faced. Their voices were filled with relief and gratitude, and John could see that the trust he had built had been honored by both sides. For the first time in days, he allowed himself a deep breath, feeling the weight of responsibility lift slightly. As the sun set behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the snow, John reflected on the events that had brought them here. He realized that courage was not measured only by physical strength or daring acts. It was also measured by integrity, compassion, and the willingness to do what was right, even in the most difficult circumstances. By staying true to his promise and respecting the traditions of the tribe, he had ensured the safety of the women and honored both their lives and his own principles. The mountains, once silent and imposing, seemed to acknowledge the conclusion of this chapter. The snow continued to fall gently, covering footprints and softening the edges of the landscape. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it a sense of calm and resolution. Inside the cabin, John packed up supplies, preparing to continue his life in the wilderness, knowing that he had done everything in his power to protect those in his care. As night fell, he watched the stars emerge above the mountains, bright and clear against the dark sky. He felt a quiet sense of fulfillment, knowing that he had faced impossible choices, honored his word, and ensured the safety of others. Ahioka and Naeli were safe with their people, their lives preserved, and their trust in him had been justified. It was a victory of courage, compassion, and integrity, a lesson that would remain with him forever. John finally returned to his cabin, exhausted but at peace. He lit the fire, prepared a simple meal for himself, and sat quietly, reflecting on the past days. He understood that life in the wilderness would continue to be challenging, but he had faced one of the greatest tests of his character and emerged with honor intact. The mountains remained wild and unpredictable, but within them he had discovered the power of trust, courage, and human connection. As he lay down to sleep, he felt the warmth of the fire and the quiet strength of the mountains around him. He closed his eyes, knowing that he had acted with honor, protected those in need, and upheld the values that mattered most. And in that moment, surrounded by snow, silence, and stars, John understood that true courage was not just about surviving. It was about standing firm in the face of impossible choices and doing what was right, no matter the cost. The next morning, the mountains would continue their quiet rhythm, the snow would fall, and life would go on. But John knew that the lessons he had learned, the courage he had shown, and the lives he had protected would remain with him forever. He had faced fear, danger, and moral challenges, and he had emerged stronger, wiser, and more compassionate. And in the end, that was the true measure of a hero in the wilderness. A hero not defined by violence or power, but by courage, honor, and the strength to protect those who could not protect themselves.